Hi, folks. Welcome to the latest Indy News Publishers Speak, episode 4. How about that? And we're a little late. We're doing it a week late because it was the holiday last week, basically. Still kind of the holiday this week, but here we are. What troopers we are. And so I'm Jason Pramas with Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism. I realize I should change my little title underneath my visage here, but I'll do that in a second. And co-hosting here is
Brian Zayatz from the Shoestring out in Western Massachusetts.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about, at least for a bit, because we're still a bit befuddled by this, honestly, a white paper that Press Forward, the big funders consortium that we've talked about a bit in previous episodes, they put out this paper called Catalytic Capital for Local News. And, you know, we're sort of both intrigued and confused by this kind of initiative, this idea, you know, that's floating around clearly in very, very, you know, top circles. Pardon me while I cough for in the top echelons of the nonprofit, you know, kind of news space, right? A lot of organizations and individuals that we've already talked about in our first 3 episodes are appearing, you know, are mentioned in the white paper. They're involved in these conversations that we have not, you know, our organizations have not been involved in. I don't know, Brian, that any organizations we know have been involved in them, particularly local news organizations, although this is an initiative that is supposed to benefit in some way local news organizations like ours. But and they, you know, the author of the paper, Caroline Ross, who runs a consultancy called the Valentin Company, and also works for a public media company, I believe it's called, that seems to, you know, work with public media, as the name would imply, you know, said that she consulted with a bunch of publishers like us. It's possible. I mean, you know, there's certainly about at least 1,000, you know, kind of local and regional news outlets that we're aware of out there. And many of them are nonprofit, not all, but probably at least half of those. And between you and I, we know certainly at least 100 of these folks, if not more. And we're in pretty regular touch with people. We have different lines of communication, including through the Alliance of Nonprofit News Outlets that we both, you know, co-founded with a bunch of other people. We hadn't heard of this. Perhaps, you know, we were given a survey instrument, but, you know, publishers such as we get so very many surveys sent to us, and rarely is any money proffered, you know, so, you know, to pay for our time, which usually could be much better spent doing virtually anything else to complete these surveys. So, I mean, maybe we got sent one and we just don't remember that it was this particular initiative. Or maybe, as is often the case with these high-level things, you know, people are kind of squirrely when they deal with us. They don't say what they're really up to. You know, we don't really know what's going on. But as far as we know, we don't know we haven't heard about this thing until Press Forward itself started talking about it over the last couple of months, released this paper, you know, I think several weeks ago. And, you know, now we're taking a look at it and discussing it today. Quickly, the idea under discussion is that there are grants, right, for those organizations that can receive grants. Pretty much, you know, nonprofit or for-profit news organizations can receive grants, but for-profits are usually not, you know, given grants, right? It's not as common. It can be done. It's being done more than it used to be. Not as common. But there's that kind of funding, certainly in the nonprofit journalism space. And then there's commercial capital, the paper says, right? and there's this in between thing though, right? Like particularly the nonprofit news outlets don't have enough, working capital or any kind of capital, and don't have enough cash in hand, obviously, most of the time. Always, many of us are just operating hand to mouth, and so there's kind of this intermediate type of capital described at points in the paper as patient capital. So there's other ways that institutions and individuals with money might get money to operations like the Shoestring or BINJ, and all our many colleagues around the country too, that haven't been done much, right? Particularly loans, right? They talk about several different kinds of investment and stuff, and several different instruments, several different ways of getting it, and who might give it and how they might organize themselves to do it, and how this sort of trend of consolidation in our sector that we've talked about a bit in previous episodes might play in here, and I wouldn't say that Caroline Ross has the most unreasonable way of discussing these issues. I mean, she seems to know her stuff as far as it goes, and recognizes that consolidation for consolidation's sake is not automatically beneficial to local news organizations. I thought that was good of her, because we certainly feel that way. We don't want to be shoved into, regional formations or national formations, kind of against our will, or, offered no other opportunity to survive other than that. We don't want to be in mergers we don't want to be in. We're worried this is going to affect our reporting, and of course it will. One only has to look at the commercial side of the news industry to see what happens with different kinds of mergers and acquisitions and what that can mean. And yeah, the profit motives involved in those, but I don't know. I guess what's worrying me, at least, and Brian, you can say what you think, is like, again, this white paper is filled with references to dozens of different kinds of organizations and coalitions and consortia and of various types, most of which I think it would be fair to say are not local news organizations. They're all kinds of other formations. And this is one of the first places where I'm seeing like the groups that we all have been calling, after Dick Toffel did it first a couple of years ago, groups like the Institute for Nonprofit News and local independent online news publishers and others that we all deal with more regularly. We've been calling them intermediary organizations, which kind of is saying like, they're not us. Like these groups they may claim to work on our behalf, but we are very suspicious of their motives and their operating practices and how we feel it's taking what money there is out there, kind of away from us, while purporting to help us. And they're kind of, so this paper is sort of using this new term, journalism support organizations and JSOs. And doesn't that sound much nicer, Brian? These groups are all, they're all there to help us and not to hurt us. So, I mean, there's just a whole bunch of groups mentioned, and we are people that pay attention to this stuff. And I got to say for myself, I've never heard of half of these groups. Like, I don't know what they are, right? And I mean, yeah, it's hard to keep track of all this stuff. In other words, different kinds of consultancies, different kinds of financial consortia that relate somehow to our sector or might, relate to our sector, or different kinds of, sort of governmental and quasi-governmental, players, different kinds of government programs that, like, I've never heard of, and financial groups and so on and so forth, right, are all in there. And obviously a lot of conversations have been going on up on high, right, that we're not aware of, where this kind of thing is apparently already in motion. But once again, it seems to me, and I'll let you go, right after this, that a lot of money is potentially in play. Some of it's supposed to get to us, maybe, but it's very unclear how. So I'll stop with there. What do you think, Brian?
Right. I mean, I think we're generally in agreement here. This is an idea and it's a white paper that, I looked at on the surface level. I don't necessarily disagree with this problem that they're identifying. And, we can look at other sectors that have found their own way of dealing with this thing. Like when we talk about cooperatives, like there's a lot of financing out there that is very specific to cooperatives, because these are, organizations that are trying to actively support each other, which is something that, I know you and I, Jason, and a lot of other publishers try to do, especially at this, pretty small local level that we're operating at.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily disagree with the premise, but I do think, you're correct in identifying some of the broader trends and the context that make me, just a little bit concerned about what might be going on here. The first thing being that, this is a conversation that is obviously happening at the upper echelons of our industry, that, you and I are not included in that. And, we didn't hear anything about this. I mean, Jason, you're a Press Forward grantee. I don't know if there's any listserv among that cohort, but,
Funny you should mention that, Brian. Not to my knowledge, and we were promised a lot more communication, frankly. I mean, with all due respect, yes, we got $100,000. It's long gone. That money is long gone now. And it was dispersed over a couple of years. And we were promised more sort of direct assistance, at least, advice and this and that, than we've really gotten. Right. Mm-hmm. So you'd think that we would absolutely be one of the groups that they would have talked to for this paper, yet we were not. So continue.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think just looking at who is involved, like you said, there's a lot of names of organizations that I had never heard of either. And so, again, it's this sort of nothing about us without us kind of maxim that we come back to, where it's okay, if this were an idea that were coming out of the grassroots and coming out of, especially the news outlets that are most at risk of closing, I would love to be prioritizing.
Like mine.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I would love to be prioritizing.
Next month. Yeah.
Exactly. The needs of groups like BINJ or other groups that, do good work and are at risk of closing. I don't really get the sense that, this is I don't get the sense that that is the group that is driving this conversation. B, I don't get the sense that that is a group that is necessarily of concern when thinking about this catalytic capital concept, because, if you look at, there's a page on the Press Forward site. It says catalytic capital for newsrooms, where to start. And here it says, if you're leading a newsroom or journalism service group and are curious whether catalytic capital might make sense for you, consider these starting questions. Do we have strong business fundamentals and a plan for repayment? Do we have a clear revenue generating strategy? These are all the same hurdles that a lot of us have had to jump through in the grant world that have made it somewhat prohibitive for us to get competitive grants. So, once again, this is not necessarily solving a problem that you or I have, because I don't think that we would be good candidates for, catalytic capital, as they're calling it, and as they're defining it, and as they're, saying who would be a good candidate for it. So,
well, we either have money or we don't, money enough to, for anybody to think about loaning money to us, right? Which is not a way that most nonprofits, certainly at our level, which if we're talking Shoestring and us, about 150 to 200,000 a year is what we're talking. We're in that range, That means we're absolutely hand to mouth, and so it's very, very difficult for anybody, no matter any institution, no matter how well-meaning, to talk to their powers that be and be yeah, we're going to loan. It might be, they talk about different kinds of sort of returnable loans or whatever, refundable loans, like the idea that we take these loans and then we make some more money and then we pay it back if we can, right? So it's on better terms than a typical loan. But if we can't, I guess it's assumed, then we wouldn't pay it back, but neither would we get more loans, right? That's even if this thing is really trying to help local publications as it purports to be doing, we would not be ideal candidates because effectively at our level, we just need money, to stabilize. And that level of stabilization, I've always pegged at $500,000 to $1 million a year, right? So yeah, if we got to that point, then it might make more sense. Which then, that's your point, right?
Yeah.
Like, how would we fit in?
Yeah, I mean, that's the exact sort of budget range that I was, as I was reading this, I was like, oh, this is for news outlets that are in that range. They have a development person or they have, a business manager. Like, these are people that, like, you and I mean, you have Linda on your team, who's a quarter time. And
that's right.
So, I mean, it's
to do development. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the kind of thing where, like, I think I don't really understand why no one is out here just saying, like, hey, like, why don't we just, build a core of development professionals who can go work for, these newsrooms and we'll pay for it, because I think it's like, let's say the Shoestring was going to get one of these loans, like, that would be what we would do with it, and maybe it would work. But, I don't think we'll get a chance to find out,
yeah, and I mean, they talk about other things that could be done for us, and maybe they will do them, particularly lining up different kinds of big players. There are various types that they mention, that this paper mentions, I should say, Carolyn Ross mentions, that would guarantee loans on our behalf, that would make different kinds of lenders more willing to do it, right? And so those institutions are large enough to take the hit if, and more likely when, we can't pay back loans or whatever it is. Because I keep saying loans, but there are really several different instruments they're discussing. And some of it includes like equity, like stock is bought, which immediately means not us, right? That's something. And who else gets mentioned a lot in here? I already said this in the list of types of groups, but consultants, as usual, as Brian and I and all our friends in our space see over and over again, the people that seem to do best when most of us are doomed are consultants, and they are very much in the mix in this thing. And kind of like a whole new, to us at least, category of financial consultants, are going to get to, dip their beak at the well that we never get near, right? To help us, Brian,
yep.
Of course.
Yep.
So, I mean, I always, and again, as a journalist, right, when I see a lot of different kinds of high-flying players, some of them I've never heard before, I start to look into them. I gotta look, I'm an investigative reporter at heart. Like, what are these organizations and institutions? What are the relationships between their principals and, high-level staffers and advisors and board members? Who's going to make money here? Let's follow the money. It's difficult to do. Like, who benefits, right? Cui bono, I think, right? Is that the Latin term we're supposed to use, that we're always supposed to ask as journalists? I don't know. I have concerns. It's not the worst such white paper I've ever seen. There's clearly input from people like us. We just don't know who they are, right? And they even mention a favorite of Brian's and sometimes mine, cooperatives. Like, cooperatives actually are mentioned as a business model that local news outlets might consider. They don't mention what kind. Probably the author doesn't understand co-ops very well. Not surprising. Very few do, But yeah, it's a little bit more in tune than most such papers, which is, I think, why we're bothering to discuss it. Like we could, or if not us, outlets like us down the line might see some benefit from this. But I don't know. And I think that we should try to, gather our friends and try to push back with alternative models along these lines, as usual, as we keep running into this. Like there are aspects of this we might like, but let's have the whole thing initiated from us, and then let some larger players come in and help us on our terms. Definitely. So that we can be as sure as we possibly can be that money just isn't flying everywhere, but where it's supposed to be going. Mm-hmm. And then we will grow, then we will survive.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like viewers of this program will probably know that Jason and I and Joe, who isn't here today, are people who, are lacking some trust for the people who are, in the upper echelons of our industry and, who are issuing these papers and kind of calling the shots about where these large sums of money are moving. And the reason of that is because, we just don't feel consulted, and we don't feel like there's, there's any initiative to actually in any concerted, organized way, like collect the feedback, allow for leadership from those of us who are on the front lines, who are, at risk of disappearing. And so, I think that is true of this white paper as it is of many other things. And so that is definitely the first thing that stood out to me about this is, I don't think this is for the shoestring. I think the second thing, and I wonder what you think about this, Jason, is that it kind of read to me, similarly to the Press Forward Locals initiative, in that it seems like the, major funders who do put money into journalism are looking for, it almost feels like an off-ramp, like they're looking for, who can do this, who isn't us. And, like at the top of this report, it says, what's the line? It's like nonprofit news or local news not only needs more money, but it needs more types of money. And, we haven't achieved the first part of that yet, despite what was promised. Like there isn't more money in the sector, there's less. So,
yeah. And they do kind of mention that as regards public media, I suppose. They also keep glomming local news organizations onto intermediaries in the report, which I find disturbing. Like we're not synonymous. Like our groups are not the same as INN or Lion. We may be members or whatever, but we're not, we're not the same thing. We have issues with them, right? Even though we get some help primarily from INN, I would say, but and there are some other forces and players out there. But yeah, I don't and I don't want to just be consulted. I want our organizations to be, and not even just at the communitarian table I've joked about in previous episodes, where we're at the kiddie table or whatever, or we're at the table, we don't get to speak, or our chairs aren't as nice and whatever. Like I want us, right? I want, be it a formation like Anno or whatever, I want the publishers to be players, which is categorically a different thing. Like where we are, if not calling all the shots, are, very much in the mix, deciding what shots are going to be called, right? Understanding that, yeah, we don't have the capital. So yeah, money talks. We understand this is, the capitalist society we live in, right? And we have to deal with this, right? So okay, but I just think that, because I do have a policy background as well, that this just results in bad policy and policy-oriented groups on high, like Rebuild Local News, one of Steve Waldman's groups that we've already talked about on the show, they're in this mix too. They are, and some of these, we should say, like, it looks to me at least like some some of this stuff is in motion already. Like Press Forward's involved, I think, as are some of these other players, in getting money to groups like URL Media, which I believe is a consortium of 35 or 36 BIPOC-led publications, right? And I think there already is some money in play. And so, okay, good, great, right? But, and I think it is being styled as an experiment, but, you know, like many such experiments, to the degree it's helpful to organizations like ours on the ground, are most of us ever going to get to participate, right? I don't know, right? I tend to think not, you know, just like the way Press Forward describes itself, I think, in the paper, you know, we're this group that has given 400 million, and it's actually more than that now. But, you know, unspoken is that they're kind of not necessarily giving more than that. Like, they've done that thing. Now they're involved, and they talk about their local chapters. We've talked about that before too. The Press Forward local chapters around New England, at least, really aren't doing much of anything yet. And it's unclear that they ever will. And it's certainly unclear if any money is going to go to us, you know, again, right? Even though that's supposed to be the big thing. You know, Press Forward's supposed to be starting these chapters to work with local and regional funders to sort of pool their resources and fund news on the ground. Well, as things progress, that doesn't seem to be what's happening. As we've heard from Joanna Detz, you know, who's usually on this show, you know, about the Rhode Island, you know, Press Forward local chapter. Like, it seems like funding may happen sort of for the chapter, but specifically not be dispersed, even crumbs, to the individual outlets, if I understand that right. Joe can correct me in the future if I'm wrong. So stuff like that, it's like, yeah, okay. And the money we're talking about isn't much. You know, it's not much at all. I don't even know if it's a couple $100,000 in Rhode Island's case at this point. So yeah, you know, and you've got at least 6 organizations in Rhode Island, 6 news outlets working with that Press local chapter, if not more. I'm sorry, Press Forward local chapter. I'm now contracting it in my brain. You know, there's at least 6 news outlets. So do the math, right? These are groups that all have budgets, something like ours, maybe small, somewhat smaller, maybe somewhat larger, right? But not much, right? Not much larger. And if you're talking about $100,000, $200,000 being put together from different funders in an area, and then it's in this Press Forward local chapter structure now, some kind of maybe new nonprofit depending on the chapter, and then what, right? And another thing I found disturbing, and I forget if it was in the report or around it on the Press Forward website, but they're very much focusing on kind of 4 areas of the U.S., Chicago being the only one where like a city is named, and then the rest is sort of like areas, you know, particular areas that pretty much track with like swing states, I think, you know, in the next presidential election, right? So many other questions then arise, you know, like how does all this connect to the Democratic Party? Because when I look at people like the person who wrote the paper and look at where they've worked before and stuff like that, you start to see organizations and people that look to me, and yes, again, folks, Brian and I are both, you know, left-wingers, like left of the Democrats, right? So when we see things like people that work with what is often called by both left and right the deep state, right? Particularly the kinds of institutions that liberal Democrats, in other words, center-right people, you know, who run the Democratic Party, have been bemoaning the loss of under the Trump administration, like USAID in particular, which is portrayed as this group that, you know, feeds hungry children and doesn't mention that, you know, how it's used to destabilize other nations on behalf of US-based multinationals in the US government, right? Like all that ugly stuff, all the misery and immiseration and death and destruction that's caused, you know, partially by the exercise of soft power by these, you know, governmental or quasi-governmental agencies like USAID, like the people that run these groups and call themselves humanitarian operatives, like Brian and I would be like, yeah, are they though? You know, are they not just another arm of capital, right? Are they not just ultimately doing the bidding of giant corporations that, you know, whose leaders now effectively run the country, right? We have this oligarchy. We see some of these folks on TV. So you know what I'm saying? Like, I look at who's involved in this, and I see connections to that kind of stuff, and I see, big foundations in a coalition like, in this case, Press Forward, and I see Press Forward saying, we're only operating in these particular areas. And I'm like, this is kind of interesting. Does this connect to this other stuff? Because it certainly seems like it does. Like it connects to big politics, right? To one of the two capitalist parties, the Democrats, and their interest and their network of all kinds of stuff, including major foundations. Like all of it's in there. And here we are trying to do news and be independent and talk about this kind of stuff, at least at the level we report at, right? Which in the case of BINJ is Massachusetts, basically greater Boston most of the time. And in the case of Ryan's group is, Western Mass. We're like looking at this going, this is all very, very weird, and we, at the end of the day, whatever it is, we're not seeing how we're going to get any benefit out of it. And it seems like this is just more ruling class politics, in our, projecting into our sector, benefiting players that these high flying circles wish to benefit, and the rest of us get crumbs at best. I don't know how much more we need to say, but I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. That's pretty much it.
Closing thoughts while I edit my little card here to say BINJ instead of executive director.
I don't know. I mean, I think we could talk all day about the things that we would love to see in our sector that, seemingly wouldn't be that difficult to do. And, I think one of the things that I would, really be interested in as something that can, has a chance of helping, people like us who are in, these organizations that would probably fall through the cracks of something like this catalytic capital initiative. I just would like to see more initiatives geared towards, building things like the Shoestring, like BINJ, that, we don't have a lot of places to turn to actually build the project that we're trying to do. And so, Newsmatch feels like one of these, certainly imperfect, but it's, a low bar of entry grant program where, if you meet some certain basic criteria, then, you're eligible, and, you can have money coming into your organization. And, there's just hardly anything else like that out there. And so, when I look at, this page of is your group ready for catalytic capital, I have to say, if I'm, the answer is probably no if I'm following their criteria. But
yeah, they have like 7 check marks we're supposed to sort of literally check off to see if we're gonna even be able to talk to them.
Yeah, and it's just strange because it's no secret that many of the players in our sector who are getting started currently or over the last 10 years are people who are journalists. They're not business people. And certainly when you look at the publications that are doing better versus the ones that are doing worse, it's the ones that had business people or, people coming from the nonprofit world and had big Rolodexes. These are the groups that are doing well right now. This just seems like another way to put money towards those groups, which again, happy for them. It's not a bad thing, but, it just feels like once again, there are some pretty big cracks and you and I are likely to fall through them.
Yeah. And I guess is my parting shot, just mention that sort of the, expertism, in this thing, there's this conceit clearly in this paper that, Not only are the kind of intermediary organizations and the consultants, stable geniuses, who know all and see all, but also the capitalists, right? They're stable geniuses like our glorious president, because they have money. They have money, therefore they are smart. We have not seen this to be the case at all. And again, we cannot help but continue to mention the lighting on fire of $22 million by Houston Landing under the aegis of American Journalism Project, which is one of these groups that's supposed to be filled with super, super smart people who know it all. Well, where'd the money go? Why couldn't that money have just been given to a bunch of us? Right? 10, 20, 30,000 bucks. We keep saying this. Every time we see, 5 million here go to quote unquote AI or, whatever money's being handed around, by, foundations like Knight and MacArthur and others, or by corporate players like Google and them, whatever they still give out, right? We're always like, no one ever seems to say like down the line, oh, here's exactly what we did with that money and here's how it benefits you. It just disappears, so like, and all, what we're going to offer you coaching. And we're like, why would we want to be coached by you? Like, what are you going to tell us? Right? All you're telling us again is if you have money, you get more money. And we know that already, you see. Right? So, all right. I guess that's it on this one. We can come back to it. It's obviously going to, we're going to see this initiative, whatever it is, up here in different forms in the coming months, I would say, right? So I'm sure we'll have occasion to chat about it again.
Indeed.
So, all right, folks, nice talking at you. And thank you, Brian, as usual. And we'll be back in a couple weeks, unless there's another holiday I'm aware of, but I don't think there is. So